Karen, stocks in China and Hong Kong surged more than 4% overnight. Those gains come after China's central bank unleashed a blitz of policy support for the economy. Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
This is the big bazooka markets were waiting for. PBOC Governor Pan Gong-sheng cut the bank's reserve ratios and cut a key policy rate. He also moved to shore up the property market. Pan lowered borrowing costs on as much as $5.3 trillion in mortgages and eased rules for second home purchases. China will also allow funds and brokers to tap PBOC funds to buy stocks. Will it work? Well, it's the biggest swing yet for the fences, and markets soared. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Brian, thank you. Well, here in the U.S., again, futures are higher after stocks closed at another record. John Stoltzfus, the chief investment strategist at Oppenheimer, thinks the S&P 500 could surpass his year-end price target.
Things are just basically improving. If we can just keep it moderate growth with resilience in jobs and economic growth and corporate earnings, I think we're good to go. As long as we avoid getting complacent, and as long as we can avoid having the bolt from the blue hit us, I think considerably higher and well beyond the 5,900 target, probably.
Oppenheimer's John Stoltzfus notes the Dow also closed at a record yesterday.
Here in the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly opens this morning in New York City. Leaders from almost 200 countries will participate. We get more from Bloomberg's David Gura in New York.
The string of speeches by world leaders will stretch over 6 days, starting with Brazil's president, by tradition. Then Joe Biden will deliver what will be his last address to the UN General Assembly as president. His speech is expected to focus on the turmoil in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine. On Wednesday, that country's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, will address UN delegates. He'll also meet separately with Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. The theme of the 79th session of the General Assembly is leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations. In New York, David Gura, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, David, thank you. Well, now to the Middle East, where one of the deadliest days of fighting in nearly 2 decades is stoking fears of an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. This morning, Israel says it's launched a new wave of airstrikes in Lebanon a day after a series of attacks that killed nearly 500 people and wounded about 1,650 more. Paul Salem is Vice President for International Engagement at the Middle East Institute.
This is really part of an escalation that started last week with the pager attacks and the walkie-talkie attacks targeting Hezbollah and other assassination attacks on high Hezbollah figures by Israel. Obviously, this is in a context of almost 1 year now of Hezbollah opening a second front on October 8 last year and Hezbollah and Israel exchanging fire.
Paul Salem with the Middle East Institute says it's not clear where the fighting goes from here. Israel says it's focused on an air campaign to degrade Hezbollah's military capabilities. But a senior U.S. official says it's important to take Israel's preparations for a ground invasion seriously.
Now, Karen, to the latest from the campaign trail. Former President Donald Trump is giving a speech today in Savannah, Georgia, focused on his economic plan. He offered something of a preview with a warning to John Deere if it moves some of its production to Mexico. We get that story from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
Earlier this year, Deere said it would lay off workers in Illinois and Iowa as it says it's facing rising operational costs and declining demand. Trump at an event on American farmers and trade.
I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%.
Deere issuing a statement saying it is committed to U.S. manufacturing with $2 billion invested in domestic plants since 2019. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. Well, ahead of that speech in Georgia, former President Trump held a rally last night in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and he said he'd handle Ukraine differently if he's elected in November.
As president-elect, if I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelensky and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal. This is crazy.
Trump also said he thinks Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky wants Kamala Harris to win the election. Zelensky was also in Pennsylvania on Sunday ahead of the UN General Assembly this week. In an interview with the New Yorker magazine, the Ukrainian leader said he doesn't think Trump really knows how to stop the war with Russia, even if he thinks so.
Let's turn to company news now, Karen. Boeing is offering a sweetened pay package to its striking workers. Bloomberg's John Tucker's on top of this story. John, this sounds like it could be Boeing's final offer?
Yeah, Boeing offered a 30% pay bump, and they went directly to the striking workers. They said the terms are final and only valid until the end of Friday. So, of course, this ratchets up pressure on workers to accept. Not sitting too well with the leadership of their union, as you can imagine. John Holden, president of IAM District 751, said his negotiating team was blindsided by the offer, and the union has no intention of putting it before rank-and-file members. Going directly to the workers drew a harsh statement. The union said by skirting the collective bargaining process, Boeing took it upon itself to disrespect our entire union. Labor strife has flared up ahead of the November presidential election. Machinists also walked off the job yesterday at Textron Aviation, and a potential strike by longshoremen threatens to cripple U.S. shipping. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, the Justice Department is planning to file an antitrust case against Visa as soon as today. We get more from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
We're told the DOJ plans to say Visa illegally monopolized the U.S. debit card market. The company operates the largest payments network in the U.S. The lawsuit will accuse Visa of taking steps to keep rivals from challenging Visa's dominance in debit cards. The DOJ will allege Visa made exclusive agreements to hinder the expansion of competing networks. And Visa will be accused of thwarting efforts by technology companies to enter the market. The lawsuit will be the culmination of a years-long probe of Visa's business practices. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thanks. Meanwhile, Bloomberg News has learned the Federal Trade Commission is expected to allow Chevron's $53 billion takeover of Hess to go forward. The original deal was agreed to 11 months ago. The takeover would be one of the largest oil deals in recent years after Exxon's $60 billion purchase of Pioneer Natural Resources in May.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The National Hurricane Center says Hurricane John made landfall in southern Mexico as a major Cat 3 storm. John grew in a matter of hours. Local authorities opened shelters for about 3,000 people, but more than 100,000 live in the coastal area. Meanwhile, a storm in the Caribbean is forecast to become a hurricane tomorrow. Helene is on track to strengthen Thursday. The man who opened fire at a King Soopers grocery store in Boulder, Colorado in 2021, killing 10 victims, including a police officer, is heading to prison for the rest of his life. After Ahmad Alissa was convicted on all 55 counts, including murder, the judge handed down 10 consecutive life sentences for each of the victims killed and 48 years consecutively for each of the 38 attempted murder counts. Boulder County District Attorney Michael Doherty applauded the jury's decision.
Today marks the end of an incredibly long and painful journey for the victims of the massacre at King Soopers on March 22nd, 2021.
DA Michael Doherty. Embattled Republican gubernatorial candidate Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson vowed to a room full of supporters he will be staying in the race in North Carolina. It comes after a report from CNN alleging Robinson was behind a number of racist posts on a pornography website's message board. Robinson spoke at a Monday event at a diner in Boone.
We're considering legal action against CNN about the story that they put out. We have not formulated our exact plan yet.
Robinson spoke to ABC's WTVD television. A U.S. Coast Guard hearing continued Monday into the doomed submersible Titan. The co-founder of OceanGate, Guillermo Sondlane, defended his company and pleaded with officials not to regard his venture as tourism, but as ocean exploration.
I hope that all of us can find some good in all of this sadness. I hope that we can find some silver linings. I hope we can find some valuable lessons learned.
The June 2023 implosion took the lives of 5 people as they took part in a deep dive to the remains of the Titanic on the ocean floor. The Biden administration has finalized its first binding award under the CHIPS and Science Act. It is a $123 million grant to Polar Semiconductor that officials say could double the company's U.S. manufacturing capacity within 2 years. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Two Monday Nighters, starting with a blowout in Buffalo. Josh Allen had 4 touchdown passes in the first half. The Bills were up 34-3 at halftime. They beat Jacksonville 47-10 to go to 3-0. The Jags are 0-3. Much closer game in Cincinnati. Washington trailed 7-0 early, but never trailed after that. The Commanders won 38-33. It appears they have found themselves a quarterback in rookie Jaden Daniels, 21 of 23, 2 TDs. He was also their top rusher as Washington goes to 2-1. The Bengals got 3 TD passes from Joe Burrow, but they are 0-3. Light baseball schedule to begin the final week. The Phillies beat the Cubs 6-2 to clinch the NL East. The Astros failed to clinch the AL West, lost to Seattle 6-1. The Red Sox are trying to finish over 500 now, 79-78 with a 4-1 win in Toronto. And while the Mets and Braves have been battling for weeks for the final NL wildcard, they could both make it. Arizona lost to the Giants 6-3. They could be the team left out. Mets begin the big series in Atlanta tonight with Luis Severino on the mound, and Francisco Lindor likely still out of the lineup with the back injury that he gave an update on.
Play this year, I don't think I'm going to play pain-free. If I play this year, I don't think it's going to be pain-free, and I'm okay with that. I just don't want it to be a constant pain where I can't bend over, and then I put my teammates in a position where I'm not helping them as much as I can. That's not fair for anybody.
Lindor's been the Mets' best player. Yankees already poured champagne when they clinched the wild card. Apparently, they are set to do it again when they wrap up the AL East. Need one more win. They host Baltimore tonight. A lot of optimism heading into the Knicks season, but already an injury. Mitchell Robinson, yet again, still bothered by the ankle that he had surgery on. He won't play until December or January. Robinson, the Knicks starting center, missed 51 games last season. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. This will be a day to remember for China's monetary policy. That is what Bloomberg Economics is saying after the People's Bank of China unveiled a wide range of measures aimed at stimulating the world's second largest economy. For more, we're joined from Hong Kong by Bloomberg Asia government and politics reporter Rebecca Chung-Wilkins. Rebecca, good morning. I think investors had been waiting for some kind of stimulus from China. It's been coming with drips and drabs up to now. Can you walk us through these latest measures just announced?
Sure, a real barrage of measures here, and the form of the announcement also quite surprising. Sort of key elements here, we've seen a cut to 50%, 50 basis points, to the triple R, essentially unleashing potential liquidity from commercial banks there. We've also seen a cut to a key benchmark rate that will sort of trickle down to other rates, LPR, and so on, as well as a swathe of measures that are intended to ease the ailing property market. Essentially, the PBOC is going to take on 100% of the responsibility in extending loans from local governments to help buy up some of the property that has been left floundering in the property market, as well as happy news for stock investors in particular, of this potential market stabilization fund. Now, we saw something similar to that happening in 2015.
So is this the bazooka that investors had been waiting for?
So I think this is earlier and more than the expectations that we were talking about, but I do not think we are close to the bazooka that people were hoping for. And I think in part because Beijing has shown this tolerance for a potential miss, a little bit of a miss of the growth target. Now, I think these monetary policies, by and large, and Bloomberg Economics is putting forward this view too, does mean that 5% target, about 5% target for GDP is now within reach. That is something of a surprise. We had a big recalibration over recent weeks with economists paring back their expectations. And we recently just had growth coming in at the worst quarter, at the worst pace for 5 quarters. So that in itself is something of a surprise. But some of the structural problems with the economy, the issues with the property market, the fact that there is a crisis of confidence, people just don't want to spend, they don't want to borrow either, those are still prevailing concerns, and particularly this worry about deflation.
So what's missing then in our last minute that could get China closer to that 5% growth target?
I think what we're really waiting to see is whether or not fiscal measures come out. There is further fiscal policy, and also whether policymakers can actually effectively unleash the monetary policy that has so far been provided. Local governments have been reticent to actually make use of the quotas to actually get out and spend, for example. And property developers, we have not really seen their projects being bought up by local governments. Local governments hesitant to spend because their finances are so strained at the moment. So it's whether or not we can see Beijing moving in to give confidence to these key actors, local actors, as well as the consumer, to actually start using some of these benefits that they have tried to roll out.